Actually, if you follow the news, you almost feel like a pinball being bounced around. There are so many things happening. Certainly this is true if you follow U.S. politics, because Trump is almost like a mental patient, saying this, then saying the opposite, doing this, and then retracting what he's done. And I say that as somebody who has supported Trump, certainly relative to Kamala Harris. I mean, we dodged the bullet with her not having been installed, but it's not that Trump is going to be much better. He's just going to be different. Anyway, will he start World War III between Ukraine and Russia? Or maybe something will go really wrong with the Israelis, who have become the 51st state of the Union with their adventures in Gaza and maybe Iran next. So we've got a lot of things to look at. You've got the political situation, you've got the military situation, you've got the financial situation. I'm very gloomy about where the economy is going. Well, the Ukrainians are losing the war badly. There's no way they could possibly win that war. You know, it's funny. When Trump was running for office, he said he could end the war between the Ukraine and Russia in a day or a week. And the fact is, he could. All the U.S. has to stop doing is sending the Ukraine money and weapons, and they would stop fighting. That would be the end of the war. But dragging it out the way it is, especially prodding the bear, taking the war into Russia and destroying nuclear-capable bombers, you're almost asking for a response. And what I understand from Russian-speaking people that monitor the media within Russia is that the average Russian is very, very angry and hot under the collar at the Ukrainian government having done this to him. So that Trump has got to end this war, because the whole thing, starting with 2014, with the Maidan revolution, it's basically all been fomented and provoked by the U.S. So the U.S. has got to withdraw from this and let the Russians and the Ukrainians sort it out between themselves. It'll come to an end because the Ukrainians don't have any weapons or money without the U.S. Oh, unless these criminals that are running Western European governments, Starmer and Macron, actually want a war with Russia. They're actually looking for World War III. These people are criminally insane. What is to be gained from provoking Russia? Putin has been made into the new Adolf Hitler, the worst human being alive. This is all a creation of Western propaganda. He's actually the best educated, the most reasonable, the most rational of all of the major world leaders today. And he's being provoked and painted into a corner where he's going to have to respond, whether pushed by his Politburo or pushed by the average Russian citizen. And then what's going to happen? Could it turn into a nuclear bomb going off in Berlin? Or maybe London or Paris? Anything's possible today with these crazy people. And I don't mean that Putin's one of the crazy people. And of course, NATO is something that should have been abolished in 1991 when the Soviet Union fell. So NATO should be abolished to start with. Look, the most dangerous entity on the planet right now is the U.S. government, with combat troops in dozens of countries around the world, provoking wars, backing them up, overthrowing governments. And meanwhile, personal freedom is vanishing all over the West. It's a very serious situation. As Thomas Jefferson said 250 years ago, the idea is to be friendly with all, but allied with none. And that's exactly the attitude that the U.S. government should take. So if Trump wants to try to make peace between the Ukraine and Russia, that's wonderful. But the amount of financial and military support going to the Ukraine should go to zero tomorrow morning to force them to the table. And it would be nice also, I'm not a Democrat, I don't really believe in elections for lots of reasons we could talk about, but one of the things that the Russians want is they want to see elections in the Ukraine, because Zelensky, among the other depredations that he's done to the Ukrainian people, I mean, outlawing the Ukrainian church and closing down newspapers that are against the government, many other things like that. He's not even the president of the Ukraine. They were supposed to have had elections like 6 or 8 months ago, whatever it was. So he's really the unelected dictator of the country at this point. He's a degraded being, and he's still in office. So they've got to withdraw support from Zelensky, let the Ukrainians pick a new leader, and end this stupid war. There's nothing to be gained from it. And as far as what the Russians are looking for, most people are unaware of the fact that starting in 2014, when the government changed in Kiev, the Donbass region seceded from the Ukraine. And as soon as it seceded, Kiev attacked the Donbass, killing about 20,000 civilians. So this went on for years. And finally, since they were all Russians, basically in the Donbass part of the Ukraine, Putin thought, we've got to put an end to this. And that's how the war started. It was provoked by the Ukraine. Yes, Putin started the war, but he was provoked into the war after years of this and supported by the U.S. at that point. Most people aren't aware of the fact that part of the $50 billion that the U.S. government gives away to foreign governments every year out of U.S. taxpayers' pockets. I mean, foreign aid is really just a welfare program taking money from poor people in rich countries and giving it to rich people in poor countries. So all that $50 billion of foreign aid ought to be abolished, but part of it is $4 billion plus given to Israel every year as a line item. And the same amount is given to Egypt as a line item, paying them, bribing them to be Israel's BFF in the Middle East. So to solve the problem, the U.S. should withdraw all financial and military support from Israel, and they'll have to sort it out with their neighbors. I don't even care who wins. Listen, I like the Israelis, I like the Arabs, no problem, or dislike them equally. But for the U.S. or other countries to get involved, and it's basically the U.S., it's like getting involved in a family feud between the Hatfields and the McCoys, if you know my reference in the U.S., where generations ago, somebody killed somebody else, and the two families have been fighting ever since. And it doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong or who started it, except it's been going on between the Jews and the Arabs, or if you wish, the Mohammedans, the Muslims, for many, many hundreds of years. This is not something that foreigners should get involved in. First of all, you can't stop the Iranians from enriching uranium and building nuclear reactors or nuclear weapons. They couldn't even stop North Korea from doing it. The Iranians is a country of 100 million people. It's not a pipsqueak like North Korea, so you can't do it. And not that I'm a supporter of any nation states or any governments, but you shouldn't do it. I mean, what is the U.S.? The world's policeman, the world's dictator? Listen, any country that wants nuclear weapons at this point can build them and have them. The Israelis have had them since the 1960s, for God's sake. Leave these people alone and they'll sort it out. And as far as oil is concerned, yeah, Iran's got a lot of oil, but speaking from the Americans' point of view, we don't import any oil from Iran, or for that matter, don't import any from the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia or any other these areas. So it's a problem with the locals, or maybe it's a problem for the Europeans, but not the U.S. to be sending their carriers and their B-2 bombers everywhere and intimidating people. You have to acknowledge the fact that the U.S. government itself is becoming more bankrupt every year. That national debt is never going to be repaid. And the dollar is a floating abstraction, which is gradually fading into the sunset. Well, what's coming up? China, obviously. So that the U.S. is a declining empire. In fact, it's a multicultural empire at this point that's expanding like a giant star in the galaxy just before it's about to go supernova. The U.S. should get its house in order. The government should radically cut its spending, abolish wholesale many programs. What Elon Musk tried to do with Doge and has failed at should be put on steroids, the spending part. Taxes should be cut. Regulations should be eliminated so that the U.S. could prosper and boom. These problems can all be solved, but what the government is doing is counterproductive on absolutely every front. The problem with Trump is that he has absolutely no philosophical core. He doesn't believe anything from an ethical point of view as being right or wrong. People get confused because of the fact that he's a cultural conservative, like the culture not to be changed radically as it was being changed under DEI and all this type of thing. Wonderful, okay? But as far as his economic and financial policies, they're mostly crazy. Slapping on tariffs willy-nilly at different rates with different countries for no reasons. He's creating chaos. And you can't afford to create chaos in a world as unstable as this one is, where all of the major governments in the world are bankrupt and head over heels in debt, as are consumers everywhere and corporations everywhere. And by throwing on these tariffs, which are taxes, and he's not reducing taxes other places, it's an additional tax. He could wind up bankrupting large parts of this economy and foreign economies, creating chaos. And as unstable as the world is today, this is a very, very bad idea. At this point, I think the situation is serious enough. I think the U.S. government should default on its national debt. Quite frankly, it can't ever be repaid. So there's two things that can happen to the national debt. Either it can be inflated out of existence, which is the direction that they're going today, which is the ultimate disaster. For the US dollar to be destroyed through hyperinflation would be almost as bad as a nuclear war. I think a better alternative is simply to default on it. All the real wealth in the country will still exist. It's just going to change ownership. And as far as I'm concerned, the people that have been financing the U.S. government to do all the incredibly stupid and destructive things that it's done by buying its paper national debt will be punished, which I see as being a good thing. The U.S. government running $2 trillion a year deficits, which incidentally are going to go to 3, 4, 5 trillion in the next few years. Most of that is being financed by the Federal Reserve, our central bank. The Federal Reserve buys U.S. government debt because nobody else wants to buy it, really, at current interest rates anyway. And Federal Reserve then credits the U.S. government's account at commercial banks like Citibank and Chase and so forth. Well, that increases the money supply. But when you shovel all that money out into society, people feel rich. And they buy things. They buy stocks. This is a fool's paradise that we're living in. They're trying to solve the problem the way the Germans did in the 1920s or the Zimbabweans did when they were printing $100 trillion bills. So this is going to end very, very badly. But that's why the stock market's going up, because at least the stock market represents real wealth. It's in bubble territory. I have no interest in owning the average stock and less than zero interest in owning bonds. They're a triple threat to your capital. You've got the inflation risk. Inflation is going up. Unless we have a catastrophic deflation, which would also be bad for bonds. You got the currency risk. You've got the default risk. You've got the interest rate risk. Bonds are a massive threat to your capital. And since the bond market is much bigger than the stock market, something bad happens to the bonds. That's bad. And the real estate market floats on a sea of debt. The average mortgage, 30-year mortgage, now is about 7%. So, of course, you can't buy or sell a house unless you can borrow money. That's also crazy. It's not the way it used to be. Interest rates go up, the real estate market could crash. So yeah, I think the U.S. economy is, everybody might feel good and the sun's shining and the McDonald's is still open, but I think it's an accident waiting to happen. It's telling me that more and more people, especially at this point, oddly enough, other governments like the Chinese government, central banks, foreign central banks, are recognizing that gold is the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. And right now, gold is reasonably priced. I've used it as a savings vehicle. Sometimes as a speculative vehicle. It's not a bargain anymore. So you own it for safety and security because it's not going to dry up and blow away like a government bond or like a stock market. And actually, there is huge speculative upside still left in gold. Why do I say that? Because I think at some point, governments are going to be forced to go back to using gold because nobody wants to accept the other guy's phony fiat money. So if they go back to using gold to make the dollar worth an amount of gold that the U.S. government has, you're probably looking at gold at $30,000 or $40,000 an ounce, which sounds absolutely incredible. But you can build a case that that could happen because the world is going to have to go back to gold.